Part 2 of Digestion and Metabolism is Human Energy Systems. Energy systems for muscular activity in the human body are designed to produce energy for work at varying rates. Pictured here is a delicious meal from Mai Tai in Boise, Idaho. Energy comes from many different sources in the body. ATP, adenosine triphosphate, phosphocreatine, sometimes called creatine phosphate as well, carbs, fats, and protein. Adenosine triphosphate is the immediate source of energy for metabolic activity, including muscle contraction. Creatine phosphate can regenerate ATP rapidly. Both ATP and phosphocreatine are in very short supply, so carbs, fats, and protein have to be metabolized to produce them. The mitochondria of the cell is where the action takes place, and ATP is the energy current in all cells. Carbohydrates, fat, and protein convert to glucose, then pyruvate, then acetyl-CoA, then enter the Krebs cycle and produce ATP and carbon dioxide. Depicted here is this process. You see that proteins need to be digested into amino acids, carbohydrates into glucose, and fats into fatty acids in order for this to occur. Study this chart that gives you the energy source with the major storage form, as well as its total body calories stored, and the distance covered with this energy source. If we take a look at the predominant energy systems in runners, we can see that really can be broken down into 4 different energy systems: the anaerobic power, anaerobic capacity, aerobic power, and then also your aerobic capacity. And you can see how the distance or seconds would increase through these systems. Adenosine triphosphate means 3 phosphates and an adenosine. Here's the structure shown in letter B. Letter A shows the energy input of this ATP, allowing for energy storage. When the cell needs the energy is released to perform the cell functions, and that ATP splits into ADP and phosphate. This action is occurring in the muscle. When energy is released, muscle contraction occurs. There's also the ATP-PC energy system. High energy bonds are created when phosphate and creatine are combined. Energy is released when these are split. The lactic acid energy system is also called anaerobic glycolysis. The breakdown of glycogen, which is the storage form of carbohydrate, is the process glycolysis, which also releases energy and can produce lactic acid. Glycolysis is actually a much more complex set of reactions. For this class, you don't need to memorize this chart. The oxygen or aerobic energy system consists of the breakdown of carbohydrates, lipids, and certain proteins for energy. Keep in mind that metabolism is when these muscle cells take in and use oxygen to produce energy, which is ATP, from carbohydrates and fat. The muscle energy sources are muscle glycogen from carbohydrate, muscle protein, and muscle triglycerides from fats. The blood gives amino acids, glucose, free fatty acids, and oxygen. Here's another way to look at how these energy sources contribute to their systems. Remember that there needs to be oxygen in order to enter the Krebs cycle, so it must be an aerobic system only. And yet another overview of metabolism. Find which one makes the most sense to you and study it. So let's review. Food contributes basically 3 sources of energy, which are carbohydrates, protein, and fat, that can be stored in the body or utilized for energy. Carbohydrates can be stored as glycogen and circulate as glucose. Proteins can be converted to glucose for energy as a last resort. Fat can be stored in an endless abundance as stored fat. There are other nutrients that are very important for the operation of the human energy systems: water, vitamins, and minerals. Under vitamins, it's especially B vitamins, acting as coenzymes. They're involved in many of the energy processes. Calcium ions are responsible for muscle contraction. Without them, the muscle cannot contract. Iron is part of hemoglobin to transport oxygen. Notice all of the B vitamins associated with metabolism in this slide. It's not necessary to memorize the names of all these vitamins and where they play a role. Just be familiar that the B vitamins are coenzymes that are important in metabolism. This concludes part 2.